Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good evening, I'm Julie Etchingham. Welcome to the programme. With so much at stake for all of us, passions are running high with accusations, claim and counterclaim. Tonight, you're going to hear those arguments live and direct. 6 of the main campaigners from both sides of the EU referendum debate will go head-to-head and take questions from our studio audience. And that audience is a mixture of those planning to vote leave, those who want to remain, and those who are still undecided. But all of them want answers. So let's welcome now the people we hope are going to provide them. Scotland's First Minister and the leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon. Also campaigning on the Remain side from Britain Stronger in Europe, Labour frontbencher Angela Eagle, and Conservative Secretary of State for Energy, Amber Rudd. On the other side, campaigning for Vote Leave are Conservative Energy Minister Andrea Leadsom, the chair of Vote Leave, Labour MP Gisela Stewart, and the former Mayor of London, Conservative MP Boris Johnson. Well, immigration, employment, national sovereignty, security and trade, just some of the huge concerns at the heart of the EU debate. And tonight, our studio audience has the chance to question our contributors about the issues that matter most to them. First, though, each of our participants gets the chance to make a 1-minute statement laying out why they think we should support them. And first, it's Boris Johnson.
On June the 23rd, we all face a historic choice: to remain locked in a European Union ruled by an unelected elite, frankly indifferent to the suffering that their policies are causing, or to take back control. Take back control of huge sums of money, £350 million a week, and spend it on our priorities, such as the NHS. Take back control of our immigration in a balanced and fair way. Take back control of our trade policy. Do deals with growth economies around the world. Take back control of our democracy so that we can make our laws and set our taxes according to the need of the UK economy. And to the prophets of doom, I say they were wrong in the past and they are wrong today. Let us believe in ourselves. Let's take back control. Let us speak up for all the people around the European Union who are looking to us to speak for democracy. Take back control on June the 23rd, and we will prosper as never before.
Thank you. Amber Rudd.
Thank you. Tonight, I'll be making the positive case for why our great country is stronger, safer and better off by being in the European Union. Stronger because it gives us influence when dealing with some of the world's biggest problems. Safer because there's strength in numbers. And better off because it gives us access to the world's largest market, which makes us more prosperous at home, gives us jobs and opportunities for our families, and critically, funds for our public services. Now, I know there's a lot of claims and counterclaims flying around and quite a lot of heat, but at the core of it is this: we know what we get if we vote to remain. But if you ask what we get if we vote to leave, they say we just don't know. Well, I say just don't know just isn't good enough. As a mother, I won't take that risk with my children's future. The stakes are high. You either vote and take a leap in the dark, or you vote to remain and build on that prosperity.
Amber Rudd, thank you. Gisela Stewart.
Everyone watching tonight, just ask yourself one question. Would you join the European Union today? If you want control over your money, then the answer is no. If you want control over your borders and your security, then the answer is no. If you want control over all your taxes and your trade, then the answer is no. The European Union just isn't working anymore. The noble idea, dreamt up in the last century, is turning into a nightmare. 50% of the under-25s in Greece are unemployed. The only continent which has got a higher growth rate than Europe is Antarctica. Our membership fee to the European Union is 350 million a week. That's your money, which you neither see again, nor do you have any control over. And it is for that reason that I say to you, take back control, vote leave on June the 23rd.
Gisela Stewart, thank you very much. Nicola Sturgeon.
As you know, I believe that nations should be independent, but I also want the UK and Scotland to stay part of the EU. The reason is simple. In the modern world, independent countries must work together. And that's what the EU is all about. Independent countries choosing to cooperate for the benefit of all. Working together for peace and shared security, to increase trade and create jobs while protecting workers' rights, to tackle climate change and to guarantee our freedom of movement. A vote for leave is not a vote for independence. The UK, like France and Germany, is already independent, but a vote to leave would cost jobs, it would damage workers' rights and it would narrow all of our horizons. By voting to remain on the 23rd of June, you can choose to stay part of building a better future for you, your children and your grandchildren.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you. Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you. As a former city minister and with 25 years running financial services businesses, but also as a mum, I come at this as to what is the best thing for our children and our grandchildren. And there's 2 points I want to make. The first is that we have a superb future ahead of us if we take back control and leave the European Union. 80% of the world's economies are not in the EU single market, and the UK, as the world's 5th biggest economy, can do an enormous amount of trade as a free and independent democracy. But my second point is there are grave risks ahead if we stay in the EU. That project is failing. It has failed a generation of young people, and we cannot escape from the risks that it is to us. So for me, the choice is clear. EU is yesterday's game. Our future is to take back control and vote leave on June the 23rd.
Andrea Leadsom, thank you. Finally, Angela Eagle.
Thank you. We're at a crossroads. Whichever path you choose in this referendum, there will be no turning back. The choice you make will affect your prospects and those of your loved ones for generations to come. Now, tonight you're going to hear a lot of nonsense and even misinformation from the Leave campaign. Don't fall for it. This is a vote about jobs. 3 million are linked to our trade with Europe, and they would be at risk if we left. And your rights at work are on the ballot paper too. Paid leave, time off to have children. Leading Leave campaigners think that's red tape to be cut. Leaving would lead to a bonfire of workers' rights. So don't vote for a race to the bottom. Let's be optimistic. Let's be confident in our ability to project our values in Europe and in the world. That's why I and the Labour Party are asking you to vote Remain on June the 23rd.
Thank you, Angela Eagle, and thank you all for your opening statements. It is now time for our first question. Each of our contributors will have 40 seconds to answer before we go to a free-flowing debate. And our first question this evening comes from management consultant Manraj Otti. Manraj.
Good evening. A factor that will sway many people's decision on the vote is immigration. Immigration is good for the country and our economy, but only when appropriate controls are in place. Which decision, Leave or Remain, allows us to put in place the appropriate controls to ensure that we have immigration that only improves and adds to our country?
Manraj, thank you. And first to respond, Angela Eagle.
Well, of course it's important that all immigration is fair and properly managed. This is a difficult problem, and if we get it wrong, it does lead to terrible pressures in particular areas of our communities. But I think that the Leave camp are actually offering very simplistic solutions to a complex challenge. They've said that the Australian points system is the answer. But actually, if you look at the Australian points system, they have more people per head going into Australia. It would put immigration up, not down. So there are no simple solutions to this difficult problem.
Boris Johnson.
The Remain campaign are offering absolutely no solution whatever. We are proposing an Australian-style British solution, which would allow people to come in on the basis of the skills they have to offer our country and our economy, a points-based system. And it would be fairer because we currently discriminate massively against people from the 92% of the world who do not come from the European Union while having unrestricted access to people from 28 countries without even being able to check whether they have criminal records.
Boris Johnson, thank you. Amber Rudd.
Thank you very much. Well, the questioner has concerns about it, and he's right to have concerns about it. But Angela's right. This is a complex problem. There isn't a silver bullet, and I know that that's what Boris and his team would like to have, but you need to look at the numbers, although I fear the only number that Boris is interested in is the one that says number 10. But the fact is, as Angela has said, it is in Australia, it is twice as much as it would have here if we adopted their system. They don't have an answer to it. The right answer is the approach that David Cameron has taken, which is negotiating a special arrangement with us with the European Union, whereby people who come here can only take out when they've put in. They should come here to work, not to take out.
Andrew Leadsom.
Immigration is very valuable to our economy. We need more people to come here and work as we're living longer. That's a good thing. The problem is, as a member of the EU, it is uncontrollable immigration, and that's where the problem is. And so what we're finding, according to the Bank of England, that uncontrollable immigration is having a dampening effect on wages, so people are unable to earn. And what we're finding is school places have pressure on, doctors' surgeries appointments, and, of course, getting onto the housing ladder, concreting over the green belt. These are the problems of uncontrolled immigration. We need to take back control and vote leave on June the 23rd.
Thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, yes, immigration is causing pressure in some areas and public services. I see that in parts of my own constituency. But do you know what? The answer to that is to invest in our public services, not to impose needless austerity cuts. Secondly, EU migrants make a positive contribution to our economy and they bring much-needed skills. And thirdly and lastly, freedom of movement is a two-way street. It's not just about people coming here, it's about our freedom of movement as well. There are 2 million British citizens living in other parts of the EU. We don't call them migrants, though, we call them expats. I want to do what Boris once said he would do, make the case for immigration and the contribution it makes.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you. And Gisela Stewart.
I'm an immigrant. But when I came, I had to have a skill which they were looking for, one that was needed. It took 5 years before I had the unlimited right to work and stay here. Today, we have free movement of people within an area that includes the Eurozone with massive unemployment rates. Without control, what will happen is that our ability to plan for schools, for housing, and for hospitals is limited. We can take control, and that control is that if we leave the European Union and we introduce an Australian-based points system, then we can protect our public services, we can choose who crosses our borders, and you, the voter, will have control.
Thank you. Gisela Stewart, thank you for those opening comments on this issue. Amber Rudd, if I open the floor for the debate to you first on this question of controls on immigration.
Yes, my main issue with the Leave campaign's proposal is they're not facing up to the issue that it is a complex problem, which is really highlighted by the questioner's point. There are benefits and there are difficulties. Instead, they think there's a silver bullet, and that just doesn't face up to the truth. What we need to address is how to get the best out of immigration while protecting, as Nicola said, the advantage of people to move abroad. What it isn't is there is no answer to the immigration question, which is crashing the economy by leaving the European Union.
Boris Johnson.
I think Amber is really... We both fought on the same manifesto, which was to cut immigration to the tens of thousands. And it is impossible to do that. We both, I think, hoped that there would be reform of the European Union treaties that would allow us to do that by taking back control of our borders. That did not happen in the renegotiations. We didn't get anything of the kind. We didn't even succeed in our attempt to make sure that people had a job to come to. There were 77,000 people who came to this country from the EU without even a job offer last year. 184,000 net. Now, I'm massively pro-immigration. I'm the descendant of Turks and very proud of it too. But there's got to be democratic consent for the scale of the flows that we're seeing. Okay. And at the moment, it's corrosive of trust in democracy.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, you know, I hear the Leave campaign talk about an Australian point system. We've just heard Australia has higher immigration per head of population than the UK does. That is a fact, but you don't hear many facts from the Leave campaign. It's also the fact that we hear talk of high rates of immigration. There's also, generally speaking, record high levels of employment across the UK right now, because open, inclusive economies tend to be stronger economies. So if you're struggling to access public services or struggling to access housing, and when Boris was Mayor of London, of course, building of affordable housing plummeted in London. But if you're struggling to access services, then blame the politicians. Don't blame the immigrants, because they're the ones not investing in our public services.
Let me just bring in Gisela Stewart on that.
But the point of a point system is that you actually have control over the numbers. If the Australians design the system in such a way that the numbers increase, then it's equally possible to design a system where they decrease. What we have now is a mainland Europe of 500 million workers and people who have the automatic right to be here. You cannot plan public services if you have only control over about half of the people who come in here.
OK, let's bring your Labour colleague, Angela
Boris Johnson pretending to be worried about the problems with public services when, as 8 years as mayor, he left London with a huge housing shortage and he built hardly any houses. And we've got the Leave campaign talking about the pressure on public services when Boris Johnson voted with the Conservative government to have huge cuts in public services, and that's where a lot of this pressure is coming from.
We'll allow him to respond to that in a moment. I want to bring in Andrea Leadsom.
The truth is that if we stay in the EU, there is no chance of controlling our immigration. The Remain camp have failed to answer that question. People are genuinely concerned. The Bank of England says wages have been pushed down. It's only by taking back control that we can actually sort this out. People are genuinely struggling with access to public services, and the Remain side have no answer to that.
Let's bring in Amber Rudder.
Well, Andrew, you know that there's not a consensus on that, on the impact on wages. And the fact is, I come back to the fact that your plan simply doesn't stack up. You need to level with the British public here. There are experts involved here. Migration Watch, who are not necessarily friendly to immigration, have observed that this could have exactly the opposite effect. We need to address this. It is a complex issue, but your proposal does not do that.
In a moment, Boris Johnson. Andrew, let's just respond to that point, then I'll...
I just reiterate exactly what Gisela said. Australia is a massive country with a small population. They choose because they have a controlled system. If we have a controlled system, we can choose.
Thank you. Boris Johnson.
What Andrea said, but if I may say so, I think the real problem here has been that the flows have increased exponentially, or very, very considerably over the last 10, 20 years. We have absolutely no way of controlling it. A city the size of Newcastle arriving every year, that's a very considerable pressure on our population growth. We need to sort it out. We proposed at the last election that we could do it, and all politicians say that they can do it. We are actually offering a way to do it, which is to take back control.
Nicola Sturgeon is shaking her head there. Let me bring in Nicola Sturgeon.
The problem with this Tory commitment at the last election is that it was a dishonest commitment. It was dishonest then and it's dishonest now. The fact is, most EU migrants who come here to work. They work, they provide skills, they contribute, they actually pay more in than they take out. Our economy would suffer if we pulled up the drawbridge and stopped people coming in. Now, I know that puts pressure on public services. As I said, I represent Glasgow. I see that in a part of my own constituency. But I say again, the answer to pressure on public services and housing is to invest in our public services and our housing. Because the impact of austerity on our public services is much greater than the impact of immigration.
You wanted to come in there.
I'm glad to know that the Scottish Parliament at one stage considered an Australian point system, and I would invite them to go back to that, because the big thing is about that any asylum and immigration policy a country has requires the consent of the people. You, the voters, have to know who you can hold accountable for the decisions you've made. At the moment, it's only about half of it which we can control, and I want to invite you to take back control.
You're shaking your head there, Amber.
Well, you're just not levelling with the British people. The fact is, it is not that simple. There are over 200,000 people from the European Union who work in our public services, 50,000 doctors and nurses in the NHS alone. You can't just take this radical step without recognising this is a difficult issue. We need to address it, but not in the way you're proposing.
Why on earth don't we
actually... OK, let Angela Eagle come in.
Why on earth don't we bring back the Migration Impact Fund and stop actually cutting the areas that are the most vulnerable in local services the most? My local authorities had huge cuts, much larger cuts than some other areas, and yet they have more of a problem. So the government have got to pull up their socks and actually ensure that they look at the pressures that cuts are causing in local communities up and down
Boris
the
Johnson.
Of course, people can always argue for spending more money on all sorts of priorities. What we're saying, by the way, is that if we took back control of our money, we'd have £10 billion more. If we left the EU, we'd have £10 billion more to spend every year on our
Boris,
priorities at the very least. And I may point out that the most important effect of immigration on huge numbers of people, as Andrea has rightly said, is to compress wage growth and to compress their wages. As the Bank of England said, for every 10% growth in immigration, there is a 2% reduction in wages.
Let's take that.
That bears thinking about.
Well, there was quite a chorus there from this side. That was a very specific point there on wages. Could one of you address that,
Well, just
Peter?
on the wages, the fact is there is not a consensus on that, and I think you know it. It's
No,
the
the Bank of
10
England
billion that he
said it.
particularly said that I objected, that we could have a chorus of. Because the fact is, as has been said today, when Dr Sarah Wollaston stepped down from the... Sorry, she didn't step down from the Select Committee when she decided to stay with Remain rather than vote for Out. You don't save money by leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
Instead, you have less for the public services. That's what's so wrong about your proposal.
The
Andrea Leadsom.
CBI.
Yeah, I'd like to make the point that, you know, if we don't take back control and vote leave, what's going to happen further down the line? And we've had this discussion about the problem we have today. We've had 77,000 people coming here from the EU who don't have a job. Now, of course, across the Eurozone, you have 50% youth unemployment in Greece and in Spain, 38% in Italy, and even more in Portugal. The problem for those young people is it's going to put even more pressure on the United Kingdom as people, quite rightly, are looking for a future career. And it's devastating impact on the United Kingdom, let alone when we see further accession countries coming in.
Let's, on that point of the inequalities of wages and employment across the EU, Angela Eagle.
Well, look, the TUC says that if we leave the European Union, wages will actually go down. There will be more pressure on already pressured
Lord Rhodes,
people.
the head of the Remain
Thank you.
campaign,
Allow
said
Angela
so.
Eagle to finish,
That's
please.
He
again,
did.
Thank you.
again, that's just not true,
He did.
Boris.
It's true.
That's just not
It
true.
is.
Your
It is true.
entire
It is.
campaign is based on falsehoods.
No.
It's emblazoned across your
Come on.
bus. It doesn't cost
You're saying Lord Rhodes didn't say that wages would go up?
It didn't cost.
say that.
It
Are you
doesn't
saying that
cost
Lord Rhodes said that
300.
wages wouldn't go up?
It doesn't cost £350 million to be a member of the EU, and you know that's
Are you saying that
true.
that's
And
money
you've emblazoned it across your bus, and you refuse to take it back. Now, the head of the Statistics Authority has told you it's not true because it doesn't take account of the rebate and any of the
Okay,
money we get
thank you.
back.
Let's
the
get a
TUC
response.
says we get £10
Thank
for
you,
every
Angela.
£1 we put
It is
into the
perfectly
European
true.
Union back.
It is perfectly true and verifiable that there is, in fact, slightly more than £350 million a week that we do not
You're not actively
control.
going to perpetuate
That we do
this
not
myth, are you?
control. Huge sums of it go to
It's
Brussels
a
and never
goodness
come
sake,
back.
Boris.
We could use some of that money to help alleviate, solve the pressures in the NHS that
Look,
are
the
caused
false
by
Angela Eagle.
uncontrolled immigration.
It's a
This
bit
is
rich
legal.
to hear the man who used to say we should be charged for using the NHS pretend that he's now the defender of the NHS. I am staggered that Boris Johnson is standing here tonight still defending this £350 million a week figure. It's a scandal that that's still emblazoned across the campaign bus because it's an absolute whopper. The Statistics Authority says so, the House of Commons Select Committee
saying we
says
control
so,
that money?
everybody knows so.
There's
The
no-
cost,
you-
the contribution,
Okay.
the
Thank you.
contribution to the EU that each of us makes every week is less, every day is less than £1. But what do we get for that money? We get freedom of travel, we get a single market of 500
We certainly
million
do.
people, we get the chance to cooperate, to keep ourselves safer. These are the gains of
Okay,
being in
may
the
I-
EU. And
Yes,
that's what
thank
we
you,
focus on.
Nicola Sturgis.
May I
Andrea
Boris,
Leadsom.
get
respond to
that
that?
lie off your
May
bus.
I respond to that?
We're going to repaint the bus.
300
Will you?
Are you saying?
May I
Are you saying?
respond?
Sorry, go on, Andrea. Sorry.
May I respond to that? If I ask you how much you earn and you tell me 30,000, are you telling me the sum after tax and national insurance in your household bills? Of course you're not. The point is that £350 million a week is exactly what the Office for National Statistics say is the amount due to the EU. The point is that 25% of it, roughly, is then given back to us in the form of a rebate, which the EU controls. That only lasts till the end of this decade.
Yes.
Another 25% comes back in subsidies. Again, the EU controls it. and £10 billion a year goes to the EU, which we never see again.
Thank you.
That's enough to meet the needs of the NHS.
Let's cross the floor and go to your colleague Amber.
What is so misleading about this is the fact that being in the European Union makes us money, it doesn't save us money. There is no saving from leaving the European Union, and what we're going to do is repaint that bus, and we're going to put a leprechaun on one end, a great big rainbow on one side, and a pot of gold at the end. Because that's all it is pure fantasy, that
we're
bus.
talking about cold, hard cash that belongs to the people of this country, that is sent every week, every year
I'm going to
Brussels.
draw a line there. Thank you. I'm going to draw a line, and we can all draw a breath, and we will thank you for your contributions on that issue. I don't doubt it might arise again at some point, and we'll go to our second question this evening. Mark Cameron has a question on the economy.
Good evening. I'm a co-owner of a printing business, and it feels the uncertainty of the referendum could cause a downturn in our industry. How can you reassure me that the referendum result you are campaigning for is the best option for people like me and the economy as a whole?
Mark, thank you very much indeed. And to open the comments on that, I'll turn first to Andrea Ledson.
Well, the answer is that 80% of the world's economies are outside of the EU single market. And just today we heard Anthony Bamford, the head of JCB that makes the diggers, the UK's biggest manufacturing company that employs thousands of people in this country. He was saying we will do fine if we leave the European Union and take back control. 99% of businesses in this country are small and medium businesses. Only 6% of them export to the EU. The vast majority of them think that the UK should take back responsibility for negotiating our own trade deals. We should take back control. We will do very well.
Thank you, Andrea Ledson. We're going to stick to the timings on this. Angela Eagle.
Well, look, the European Union has the biggest single market for trading in the world, and you can trade there without extra costs, with information and regulations the same for the whole of the market. And 3 million UK jobs are connected to that. And so this matters for working people. 9 out of 10 economists are predicting that if we leave the European Union, there will be another recession. The TUC, the 10 largest unions representing 4 million workers in this country, are campaigning to stay in because they say there will be a recession if we come out, and we can't afford
Thank you, Angela Eagle. Thank you, Boris Johnson.
I think it was the head of the Remain campaign, Lord Rose, who said that, Stuart Rose of Marks and Spencer, who said that what would happen when we vote to leave, if and when we vote to leave on June the 23rd, is that nothing much would happen to begin with. There would be no economic shock. What he did say is that people would get a pay rise, people on low incomes would get a pay rise. And I think the authority that I'm inclined to trust is our Prime Minister, David Cameron, who only a few months ago, before the whole logic of Project Fear kicked in, was very clear that Britain could prosper and flourish outside the EU. We could do trade deals and we'd have a great, great future. And that is exactly what Anthony Bamford has said today, and I'm with him.
Boris Johnson. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, a vote to remain would mean businesses retain access to the world's biggest single market, 500 million people instead of 65 million people in the UK. More than 40% of exports go to other European countries. If we're not in the single market, it is harder for companies to exports because their goods and services get more expensive, and imports coming here get more expensive, which puts prices up as well. So I think it makes sense. It's common sense to stay in that single market. And when the Leave campaign are asked what would the trading relationship be, they usually say they don't know, or worse, they don't care. They sometimes say it would be like Norway. Norway has to pay into the EU, it has to have free movement, and it has to abide by all EU rules without having any say in how they're made. I think that would be a terrible deal.
Time up. Gisela Stewart.
The EU's economy is broken. More than 50% of young people in Greece can't get a job. It's little better in other Euro countries like Spain, Portugal and Italy. And we will end up having to pay for bailouts for these failing economies, whether we like it or not.
That's another lie.
But we can take control. It's nonsense to suggest that you have to choose between trade and democracy. Countries across the world trade with the EU and will go on trading. We will do the same with a free trade deal. The UK is the world's 5th largest economy, and we will do better if we vote leave and take control.
Hear, hear.
Gisela Stewart, thank you. And we'll listen to these quietly. Amber Rudd.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your question. And you are right, of course. Jobs are what is absolutely central to this, and small businesses matter. But the fact is our economy stronger by being in the European Union or not? Now, there's a lot of people saying one thing, a lot of people saying another thing, so I think it is right to listen to the experts. And sometimes experts get it wrong, but on this, there is a consensus. 9 out of 10 economists say so, the Governor of the Bank of England. There is a consensus on this. And if we want strong businesses like yours, then we need to stay in the European Union, because that's what matters. And that's why this really impacts on families at home. We want to support those families, making sure they have jobs and opportunities. That's what we'll get.
Thank you. Gisela Stewart, if you'd like to open.
When it comes to experts, there's really just one expert which I think matters, and that is you, the voter. Look at what the risks are if we remain. Look at what it will mean for the future, because this is your one and only chance to actually take control about your trade deals, take control over the taxes you pay. My late husband was an economist, and I can tell you there were some things he got wrong. And then there were 1 or 2 people who actually, when you look at what they've done, got it right. Therefore saw the crisis, therefore saw that the euro was a wrong thing, and they are business people. That's why I thought what Anthony Bamford of JCB today did was so important. He's the biggest, largest manufacturer in this country. He foresaw that the euro was a wrong idea, and he said vote leave is better.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I think it's just common sense that our companies would do better with a market of 500 million people to trade in. But, you know, the EU is not just a market, it's a community as well. I think the protections and the rights that workers have across the EU are also really important. What are those rights? Paid maternity and paternity leave, paid holidays, restrictions on the numbers of hours you can be forced to work, protection for pensions. These are real gains of EU membership that I think we should value and protect. And I don't fancy, to be perfectly honest, the prospect of a future of perhaps a Prime Minister Boris Johnson with complete freedom to rip up workers' rights, to bin environmental protections, to keep blaming foreigners for all the ills of the world. I think that's a pretty horrifying...
Shall we turn to Boris Johnson?
Well, thank you. Speaking as somebody who's proud to be descended from foreigners, let me just say, first of all, that on the single market, it is totally illusory to think that we necessarily need to be within that legal system in order to do well. In the last 20 years since the single market was founded, 27 independent non-EU countries did better than us in exporting goods into the single market, including America. 21 countries did better at exporting. 21 did better at exporting services.
OK, Angela Eagle.
I mean, that's because our manufacturing sector is too small. And I have to say to you, the Leave campaign's leading economist is on record saying that if we left the EU, it would over time eliminate manufacturing, and that shouldn't scare us. Well, there's 2.3 million jobs, quite a few of them in Giza's constituency, manufacturing cars that go straight into the European Union. Every 36 seconds, a car is manufactured in this country that goes into the European Union, and they're putting that at risk.
On that point, Andrea Leadsom.
Unfortunately, Angela is, as she will know, not talking about anything that Vote Leave has said. In fact, UK manufacturing, just today, numbers are out showing that it has never been stronger. It's recovered from its pre-financial crisis of 2008. That's fabulous news. And going back to the head of JCB Diggers, he believes, as a big manufacturer, that it's in fact easier to do business often with the United States than it is with the European Union. It's incredibly difficult. 80% of the world's economies are outside of the single market, and most of them are growing much faster than any economy within the EU.
On that point, sorry, let me bring in Amber Rudd on that point.
It is just common sense that having access to one free market where there is one set of rules keeps the price of trade down. If we keep the price of trade down, we keep the cost of goods down, and we keep jobs up. And the reason why the Leave campaigners don't like referring to the experts in this area, like the CBR on manufacturing, is because there aren't any that support them. The consensus is it would hit the economy.
If you've got a trading bloc where they sell you 73 billion more in goods than you sell to them, and you currently have got 0 tariffs, what do you think they're going to do? It is not going to be in anyone's interest to introduce tariffs.
But you just don't know.
Look, the country votes, Gisela, the country votes in 14 days, and we have no idea whatsoever from the Leave campaign what would be happening.
We have a very good idea from the Remain campaign.
No, we have no idea what would be happening with our trade. You can't tell us whether you'd do a deal, whether you wouldn't do a deal. You've said you'd come out of the single market, but you haven't said what you'd replace it with. And there are millions of people whose livelihoods depend on the answers to those questions.
We would have access to the single market, which is the
Says
important
who?
thing.
That
is what, as I mentioned just now, there are 27 countries not in the EU that have done better than us at exporting goods. 21 countries, Angela, that have done better at exporting services. And I think they're just starting to degenerate again into Project Fear, don't you think? And I'm very struck by the way that they do this, because there's a member of that panel who's complained about the Remain campaign and says that it's miserable, negative, and fear-based. And fear-based campaigning of this kind starts to insult people's intelligence. Now, that was Nicola Sturgeon.
Nicola Sturgeon. At least it's...
I have to say...
Well, please let her respond.
I agree with Nicola.
At least it's not driving around the country in a bus with a giant whopper painted all over the side of that bus. But, you know, Boris says we'll stay in the single market. It says who? There is not a single country anywhere that has access to the single market on the basis we have access to the single market right now without having to abide by the rules of the single market. Norway, Switzerland, they have access to the single market, but they have to pay for it. They have to abide by all the rules and have no say over how they're made, and they have to have free movement. They are perpetuating a complete lie on you, and you should not fall for it. It is an absolute con.
Gisela Stewart.
No single politician is going to stand up to their voters and say, we're going to stop selling to the Brits because we want to punish them. Trade will go on. And as to in terms of what the deal is, how big do you think you have to be to strike a deal which is different from Norway and Switzerland? You're the 5th world largest economy, you're the 6th largest manufacturing business. Trade will continue.
The average time to get a trade deal in place is 2 to 3 years. Somewhere like Norway, they don't have any say in the tariffs. Now, I believe that our great country should be at the front of the table, helping to make those rules so that the United Kingdom benefits from them. Their version, they think it's about patriotism. It is the opposite. We should be leading, not leaving.
Bit of conferring going on here. Andrew Leadsom.
Let's look at this. In 53 years, the EU has achieved free trade agreements with the rest of the world that give us access to $7 trillion of world economies. Switzerland, with a population of less than 30 million, not in the EU, they have negotiated free trade with economies worth $39 trillion. That's more than 5 times as successful. It's simply nonsense. The EU has failed on trade. And why is that? Because there are 28 member states, each with different views and opinions. It takes the EU 7 to 10 years to negotiate for free trade.
You know, you're all itching to get in.
Listening to all of this, they seem to want to take a huge risk with the employment prospects of millions of people up and down this country. And Boris, you don't seem to care about the millions of jobs that will be at risk if we leave the EU. I think you only care about one job, and that's your next one.
I don't think that you care. I don't think that you care. Sorry. I'm afraid I missed the insult. I don't think that you care about the... I don't think that you care about the EU's total failure, and Andrew was completely right, to do free trade deals with Japan, with ASEAN, with Mercosur, even with America, which, according to the EU's own figures, has meant that in this country alone, we've sacrificed 284,000 jobs. Now, think what we could do if we take back control, not just of our money, of our immigration, but also of our trade policy. Can I tell you, the EU Commission has the entire responsibility for negotiating UK trade. Only 3.6% of EC Commission officials actually come from this country. How are they going to negotiate for us?
Boris, you have very strong views on this, and we all know that. But the fact is that the Manufacturers Association, the businesses that we talk to in manufacturing, like Siemens, like Airbus, who I stood on a platform with recently, they have been very, very clear. They benefit, we get more jobs, we get lower prices at home, and they are saying to us very clearly that if we leave, those jobs, that investment will be threatened. This is not a risk we should take.
Gisela Stewart.
I heard a lot of this before. And I heard it when it was about the exchange rate mechanism. I heard it most recently, if we don't join the single currency, all these things will happen. And you know what? Not only did none of the doom and gloom, which Project Fear is spreading, happen, we were a much more successful economy, and the real risk is, if we stay in, we are shackled onto a failing Eurozone, which is only getting worse. They need to sort out their problems.
Okay.
And we need to...
There was no consensus there. There were different views.
no,
Absolutely there wasn't. There was
Thank you, Boris Johnson. Amber Rudd.
There were well-known international organisations, none of which who support Vote Leave, who did not support the euro entry. So let's just deal with that. But the fact is, what Vote Leave won't level with you on is that they have no supporters but their own. There are no international organisations who agree that it will lead to a boost in a jobs.
OK, thank you.
There's only a warning that it will lose them.
Andrea Leadsom, on that point.
Well, I prefer to listen to the small and medium enterprises. They are the people who create the jobs in this country. 16 million people are employed in this country by small and medium enterprises. The vast majority of them want us to take back control for trade, and at a ratio of 2 to 1, they think the EU hinders activity and growth rather than helps it. They are the experts.
Thank you. We'll draw a line under that part of the debate for the moment. I know, again, inevitably this issue will perhaps creep into one of the other subjects we're discussing. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for that. And just before we move on, a quick reminder that ITV will be running a special programme throughout the night as polls close on Thursday, June the 23rd, when we'll bring you continuing coverage as those votes are counted. Well, our next question this evening is on one of the big issues of this referendum debate, not least today, of course, and that is the NHS. And it comes from student Zara Khan.
Okay, hello. My parents are nurses, and like most people, we care passionately about the NHS. The service is struggling to cope for a whole variety of reasons, but will things be better if we were inside or outside the EU?
Zara, thank you. And first to respond, Amber Rudd.
Now, we all know that the NHS needs more money, and you're absolutely right to bring it up. We have an ageing population, we all love our NHS, and we need to put more money into it to make sure that it continues to do a great job. But the fact is, the way to achieve that is to have a strong economy. The way to have a strong economy is to be in the European Union. Vote Leave's proposal that they somehow have some extra money to put into the NHS is a con. If we want to have a strong economy and make sure that we have more money for the NHS, then we need to stay in the European Union to be able to do that.
Amber Rudd, thank you. Gisela Stewart.
If you want a strong NHS, then you make sure that you control the money, that you take back those 350 million a week, which currently we do not have control over, and you make sure that you can plan your public services. It takes 7 years to train a doctor, 15 years to train a consultant. That requires you to be able to know how population is developing. That's why I think we need to take control over our immigration. That's why we need to plan our services. Take back control over the money, take back control of immigration, and the result will be a stronger and better health service.
Gisela Stewart, thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, I think that if we vote Remain, then that's going to be better for our National Health Service. There are, what, 200,000 people from other European countries working in our National Health Service. You're more likely to be treated by an immigrant on the NHS than you are to be treated in the next bed to an immigrant. So that's one of the important aspects. I also think it will be better if our economy is strong to enable greater investment in our National Health Service. As I said earlier on, the pressure on our public services right now is coming from what I consider to be unnecessary and needless austerity cuts being imposed by a Conservative government. Let's get more investment. But the last point would be,
thank you.
I don't think we should take lessons from people who want to privatise our National Health Service.
Thank you. Boris Johnson.
Let's be absolutely clear. We cannot minimise this money that we would get back. It is very important. £10 billion is not to be sneezed at. But more importantly, the pressure on our NHS can be seen. When I talk to GPs in the London area, what they tell me is that, yes, there is huge pressure caused, a lot of it coming from European accession countries. And the other problem is that because of our immigration policies, we cannot recruit some of the people who might actually be wanted to work in our NHS. And that strikes me as being completely crazy. And I just think, to get back to what we were saying earlier on, the Remain side have absolutely no answer to the question of what happens down the line as the Eurozone gets worse and worse and the migratory pressures increase.
Angela Eagle.
Look, the NHS is facing a crisis and it's facing real pressures, and I think I'd just like to thank all the people who work for the NHS for the fantastic job they do in trying to keep everything together under the pressure that they're under. But actually, a lot of this pressure comes from the disastrous top-down reorganisation of the NHS that the last government did, and the ongoing funding cuts and pressures that the current government nationally here have decided to impose on the NHS. Why is the Leave campaign blaming everything on immigration? They're obsessed with it.
Thank you. Angela Eagle. Angela.
Well, I think that actually it all boils down to money. I agree with Simon Stevens, who runs the NHS. He says you need money to run the NHS, and we've agreed as a government that he should get the £8 billion he says the NHS needs by 2020 in extra cash. But in truth, the net figure that we give to the EU every year as our membership fee is £10 billion. That is the net sum that we see nothing back from. 10.6. Thank you, Boris. And so if we do take back control, we will then, of course, be able to spend that £10 billion every single year on our priorities. And I think on this side we've made clear the NHS is absolutely up there.
Just to observe, since Andrea mentioned Simon Stevens, who's the Chief Executive of the NHS, that he did conclude that the best outcome from the NHS would be to stay in the European Union, as has the Royal College of Midwives, the Royal College of Surgeons. Once more, I would urge people who are undecided to look to the experts, and in this case, they are very clearly supporting us staying in the European Union for a stronger NHS.
Boris Johnson.
I think I really want to agree with Gisela. I think the people that you should think about and you should talk to when you make your decision is the patients. And our experience of the NHS, it is under huge pressure. We could have a better system if we had more money and if we were able to recruit the people we want and we were able to control our immigration, which currently we cannot do.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Patients that I speak to in the NHS in Scotland, which I do regularly, they want to see more investment in the health service, they want to see lower waiting times, and they know that one of the things that's made that more difficult are the austerity cuts that have been supported by Boris Johnson all the time the Tories have been in government. The answer to the pressures in our NHS is not to blame immigrants, many of whom work in our NHS. It's to invest more money in our National Health Service. And the last point I would make here is an important point. I wouldn't trust Boris Johnson with a health service as far as I could throw Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is the guy who said that if people had to pay for the National Health Service, they might value it more. Whatever else you do, do not trust a word Boris Johnson says about the NHS.
And also, there is this issue, this total fallacy that there'll be all this extra money. All of the economic experts say that the economy will get smaller and there will be less money. The Institute for Fiscal Studies just said that. Why on earth is Unison, the representative of staff who work and make our NHS run, saying they want us to remain? It's a fallacy that there will be this extra money. There will be less.
Let's go to a colleague in the Labour Party, Gisela Stewart.
Can we just stop this, as Nicola Sturgeon so rightly said, a miserable, negative, fear-based campaign? Because people will see through this. This is not about any of us here on the panel. This is not about the current government. This is your once-in-a-generation choice as to who you think should have control over the majority of the money which we spend, about how we decide how immigration system works. So this goes well beyond any of us here on the panel. And see through those fears. Don't let it work.
The UK government right now has complete control over how much money it decides to invest in the NHS every year. Now, the fact that the UK government has been imposing cuts in public services, frankly, is not the fault of the European Union. It's not the fault of migrants. It's the fault of the UK government. If we've got a problem with that, blame them, not anybody else.
Andrea Leadsom.
But we have to be clear. Pressures on the NHS are occurring as a result, as in other areas, of uncontrolled EU immigration. There just is no doubt about that. People who are trying to get doctor's appointments and school places come to that, and get on the housing ladder come to that. They really struggle because of, in part, uncontrolled immigration.
So
if we take back control, if we take back control on June the 23rd, we will be able to control immigration. We'll have the skills we want, and we'll get a huge slug of money back.
Thank you. I'm just going to just stop it there, because we want to focus very precisely on the NHS. Sometimes it's good to go back to the question and just reset slightly. Zara asked, her mum and her aunt are nurses. Like most people, we care passionately about the NHS. She said this service is struggling to cope for a whole variety of reasons. Will things be better if we're inside or outside the EU? What does the EU do for the NHS as a point of information, Amber Rudd?
I have to answer Zara by saying that what the EU does for this country is make it stronger and richer.
But for the NHS, she was asking
that is
specifically.
absolutely relevant to the NHS, because that allows us to pay more money into the NHS, which we recognise is needed. And this goes to the core of the misinformation, the con that we're getting from the Vote Leave campaign, that there's somehow money to be saved which could be used for the NHS. It's not that way, it's the other way. We have more money for the NHS by having a stronger economy and being
Thank you, Boris Johnson.
Can I make a very elementary point? Actually, the EU, nobody can say the EU is an economic nirvana, as they're saying. It's the, as Gisela rightly said, it's the zone of lowest growth in the world apart from Antarctica.
Yes.
And actually, if you look at the direct impact of the EU and our membership of the EU on our ability to provide first-class medical services, let me direct you to what happened with the ambulance service, which went into a terrible crisis in this city in the last couple of years because we couldn't find enough paramedics who could speak good English, and the only place to get them from was Australia, where we had to recruit 200 urgently. And of course, under the current system, they have all sorts of difficulties getting in, which do not apply to the people coming from 27 other EU countries. You know, that for me is a concrete example of how the system is simply imbalanced and unfair.
All three want to respond. Angela Eagle first, then Nicola Sturgeon briefly.
Sarah Wollaston, the chair of the Select Committee, a Conservative who, until yesterday, was part of your Leave campaign, has quit because she's saying that the claims you're making about the NHS are deliberately misleading and treating the public like fools. John Major, one of your ex-prime ministers, said the other day the NHS is about as safe with them, meaning you, Boris, as a pet hamster would be with a hungry python. I never thought I'd think it, but I agree with John Major.
Boris Johnson, respond to that. Allow Boris Johnson to respond to that.
Obviously, there's a great temptation to try and reduce this argument to a lot of personal stuff. It is very important in the short time we've got, we focus on the issues. There is no question at all. We'd have more money back. If we took back control of our immigration policy, we would be able to sort out bizarre situations where we're discriminating against Australian paramedics but cannot have huge pressures from people coming...
Nicola Sturgeon.
We don't get money back by not being in the EU. That's the lie, I guess, that Sarah Wollaston has decided to leave the Leave campaign over today. So let's put that to one side. But the question was about nurses. If you're a nurse working in the National Health Service, the other things you get as a result of EU protections right now are paid holidays. If you're a female nurse, you get the right to paid maternity leave. You cannot be discriminated against in the workplace. These are valuable workers' protections, and everybody I've heard from the Leave campaign, including Boris, have said that these are some of the regulations, the so-called burdens, that they would want to get rid of if they were freed from EU control. I think it's important we keep those protections for workers, including workers in our National Health Service.
Can we just remind ourselves why the NHS is so special, why it is different from any other health service in Europe or the world? Because it is based on residency. Whoever you are, when you're here, it's not how much you've paid in, it's not insurance-based. And for that reason, you do need to have to plan. You need to have to control. And part of the reasons of those stresses in the long term is because we cannot control the numbers coming in. And therefore, it's your last chance to do this.
On that point of planning, Angela Eagle.
Absolutely everything is about immigration. What about all the people who work in the health service?
How does the EU help the NHS?
What about all the people who work in the the health service and have access to the health service who are immigrants. Our health service couldn't work without them. Our older people wouldn't be cared for without immigrants coming in and doing jobs that some other people won't
Yes, and
do.
many of them are prevented.
This is something that you need to recognise.
It's about control.
Andrew Leadsom.
We all appreciate the work that immigrants do. Of course we do. We all value it incredibly highly. The point is, it is utterly uncontrollable from the EU. And let's come back to the money, because at the end of the day, the NHS requires money. Nicola has just said that we don't get any money back if we leave, and that's just simply not true. The Office for National Statistics is very clear. £10.1 billion every single year goes to the EU, for which we get absolutely nothing back. That's the net sum. That's, if you like, if we vote leave and take back control, we get a £10 billion a year independence dividend.
Why are you laughing at that,
This is
Nicola?
£10 back for every pound we contribute. That's
No, we don't.
a fact.
Yes, we
we
do.
would lose money if we withdrew from the EU and withdrew from the
Amber
single
Rudd,
market. But can
briefly.
we also talk about, this is not a one-way street. There are many, many British citizens living in other European countries getting access to healthcare there. We all get access to emergency healthcare if we travel around Europe and need that healthcare.
Briefly.
How would we feel if people in other countries were talking about us in the way that we're talking about people in our country?
Briefly,
It's
Amber.
disgraceful.
And this is the con at the centre of the vote leaves proposal. There is no Brexit bonus to put into the NHS or anywhere else. There is only a loss, and the IFS will tell you that. They think there's £40 billion less for the public services by 2020. That's the danger we'd be facing if we vote to leave.
Nicola, is that miserable or fear-based or negative?
You don't like
Which
it.
one was it?
Which one was it?
Most of what you've said so far, it happens
It's
to be
total
true.
nonsense. At the moment, we've got anaesthetists from India, we've got nurses from the Philippines, who cannot come in to our country as in the way that we need them for our
Thank you.
NHS because of our
Hold on a
crazy
second.
Andrew
immigration
Leadsom. Let's just bring
That
Andrew
is the
Leadsom. She was
reality.
waiting to speak. Andrew Leadsom.
This scaremongering has got to stop from the Remain side. The fact is, they have no evidence for their assertions about what happens to the economy. The Treasury forecast, let's deal with that. They assumed a basic trade deal with the European Union. They assumed no other trade, not even the existing EU free trade agreements, and no trade in 15 years. And not only that, but because we had no trade, we'd all sit around and productivity would go down. That's why they've come out with these numbers. It's absolute nonsense. It is the scaremongering, and it's miserable scaremongering, and people in this country will see through it.
It's miserable scaremongering, Amber Rudd. What do you respond to that?
If you wanted to build a bridge, you would turn to expert engineers in order to make sure it didn't fall down.
Yeah,
if
like
you were
JCB.
going
JCB.
into
Thank you.
a
Thank you,
surgery,
Boris
you would
Johnson.
want to speak to surgeons to make sure that you were getting the right expert opinion. If you want expertise, you go and get it. And if I want expertise from Boris on a good joke, I'll ask you. But the fact is,
You might not get expert
is
surgeons
what
with the
Thank you,
current
Boris
immigration
and
policy.
they don't like experts because they don't support them. It's
Cecil
sneering
Stewart.
at experts.
23rd of June is a question of where people of this country decide who takes control over the decisions made about this country. And I think they should be made here. And if you've got a health
they are
service,
made here.
Thank you.
if it has got a health
made
service,
here.
that requires planning. An economy thrives because we've got decent products. Our car industry is doing well because the cars are good, not because there's a single market.
Cecil Stewart, thank you very much on that final point for the moment. Thank you all for your contributions on that. And we're going to take a short break now.
I've been getting away with it all